In part 2 in my series on how to produce huge drums, I'm going to talk about capturing them. Let's dig in. So if you haven't seen part 1 of this video series, give it a wee watch. You can find it on my channel. I'll put a link below. We talked about the importance of getting the sound right at source, getting a good drum kit, a good drummer and a good room. Now we've got that, we're ready to start capturing. So let's talk through the process. And again, it's a pretty big one. But before we go any further, you know what I'm going to say. I would really love it if you could like, subscribe, comment below. It really helps me build the channel. And if you found this useful, there's a link below to buy me a cup of coffee. And I live off coffee, so help me out. So the first thing that may surprise you, when I'm recording a standard kit, I'm actually using 17 mics to do that. I put a lot of emphasis on capturing the ambience. It's super important to me and I feel like it adds a lot. When we get into it, I'm going to let you hear how that sounds and we're going to compare and contrast the difference between not having those room mics and having them. So before we do that though, there is something I need, okay? There's something that I like to use when I'm capturing drums. And again, it's something that isn't available to everybody and that's not lost on me. I like to use analog consoles. There's something about them, it's a workflow thing, it's a hands-on thing, and it's absolutely a sound thing. What's interesting is that I'm actually not really that bothered about what analog console it is that I use. Over the years I've tracked on Neves, SSLs, Tofts, Audience, Amex, and I think they're all great. And I really like the workflow and I really like the ability to track to Pro Tools with processing in place. And again, that's something that's super important to me. I'm going to try and capture the drums with as much analog feel and flavour as I possibly can. So not only am I using the analog preamps, which always sound great on a great analog console, I'm going to use the analog EQ and I'm also going to patch in some analog compression. What's important to note is that I don't go silly with this, okay? I don't overdo it. What I'm doing is I'm adding a bit of tonality and I'm shaping the tone before it hits Pro Tools. When I'm adding EQ, I'm really, I'm cutting or boosting by 3 to 6 dB, and when I'm compressing again, I'm maybe about 6 dB of gain reduction, nothing too major. There's one main reason for that, that is I want to leave myself some space in mix. I'm not trying to pre-mix this entirely here, I'm just trying to get it sounding the best I possibly can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down pretty much drum by drum, talk about my process, my position, my mic choices, and then we'll have a wee listen to how that sounds in Pro Tools. So let's start off with the kick drum. So with my kick drum, I'm going to use 3 separate mics that do 3 separate jobs. The first mic I'm going to use is the Yamaha Sub Kick. I really love this. All it does is just add sub energy to the bottom end. I think it sounds amazing. Next up, I'm going to use a Sennheiser E602. That gives me lots of punch and lots of aggression and that kind of click that a lot of drummers like. On the outside of the kick drum, I'm going to use an AKG D12 VR, which is a kind of modern recreation of that classic mic. In terms of mic position, the sub kick is going to be on the outside. The kick in is just going to be in the access port, maybe about halfway in. And the kick out is going to be a couple of inches back from the drum skin. In terms of processing, obviously I'm going to gain stage it through the console's preamp. I'm going to EQ it with the console EQ. I used an SSL duality so I can flick between either the E series or G series EQ. Quite often I like to track with the G series, I think it's a bit warmer, and I'll maybe add a little bit of the console dynamics just to control it. And again, I'm not smashing it hard or anything like that, just enough to kind of hold it in place. With the kick in mic, I'm definitely going to dial in a little bit more aggression, a little bit more click, because that's essentially what I'm trying to get from that microphone. And again, I'm going to use a little bit of the console dynamics as well. The kick out, I'm going to try and EQ that so that I can get a little bit of thud from it. Not low thud like the sub kick does, but just like a kind of low mid sort of thing, just to kind of fill out the sound a little bit. And again, for that, I'm going to use the console dynamic. So why don't we have a listen to those in the Pro Tools session. So let's have a look at the sub first of all, right at the top. So if you're not wearing headphones, you might struggle to hear this, but it's not adding much, but it's just adding a little bit of kind of depth at the bottom end. Alright, and then next up in the middle, we have the kick in, which is the Sennheiser 602. And you can hear there's lots of aggression there, which is really, really good. And then kick out, which is the D12. And that's adding like that kind of thud that we were talking about earlier on. Let's combine them. And then let's mess around with the balance. So again, if I want less impact, I can take this down. And I get more of a thud. If I want more of the click, there we go. And again, more of that kind of subbiness at the bottom end. Alright, next up is our snare drum. And I'm going to use 3 mics on the snare drum. I'm going to use an SM57, and then I'm going to tape a Beyer Dynamic M201 to that, literally taping them together, and I'm going to align the capsules so that I don't get any phase issues. And then I'm going to use another 57 underneath for the snare bottom. So with the 57, again, it's going through the console preamp, and I'm going to use some of the console EQ. What I'm trying to get from that is my kind of main sound, like the main sort of snap and aggression from that. And with the Beyer Dynamic, I'm trying to get a little bit more warmth from that, and again, I can blend the two in together. And then from the snare bottom, which again, I'm going to add some EQ, I'm just trying to get, again, just that kind of snare rattle from the bottom, which is like super useful. I don't use a lot of it actually, but it is really quite useful. In terms of compression, I'm going to use distressors. So I'm going to use a distressor on both the 57 and the Beyer 201, and then I'll use some console dynamics for the snare bottom as well. In terms of position on the snare, I am looking at about 3 fingers from the skin, and I like to point my microphones to the center. The center is where the tone is. I'm not a fan of going really close to the outer rim. That doesn't really work for me. I know it works for some people, but I'm looking for body, I'm looking for tone, and 3 fingers above in the center is the place that I always start with, and then I'll move from there. One of the things I'll say about snares is that every inch you move the mic in any direction can have a massive tonal difference. So if you put a mic up and you don't like what you hear, make a change. By having those 3 together, what I'm really trying to do is kind of dial in the overall snare sound using the faders. So let's have a wee look at that in Pro Tools. So let's have a listen to the 57 first of all. Sounds like a nice healthy snare. Very boingy snare actually, isn't it? I love it. Right, so this is the 201. So what you notice between the two is the 201's a bit warmer, and the 57 has got a bit more kind of aggression. And then of course we've got our snare bottom underneath as well. And that's just adding the snare rattle. So let's put them all together. And again, let's mess with the balance a little bit. So I always like to take my snare bottom down a wee touch. So you can hear that sounds quite nice. Again, if I wanted to take out the Beyer, you get the kind of aggression from it. But when I introduce the Beyer, what we get is a bit more depth. So the snare fattens up, and again we can mess around with the balance between the Bear and the 57. And for me, that kind of balance there works really nicely. It's really subtle, but it's effective. And again, if we want the kind of the underneath to kind of cut through a bit more, which is quite nice, we can. All right, let's move on. All right, moving on to the toms. For this, I use the Audix D2 tom mics. I use them because I really like the sound of them, but also they have a super cardioid pickup pattern. And again, that's really useful for dealing with bleed. I do love MD421s, which are the classic tom mic, but I've always found that there's a bit of an issue with bleed on them. And I've just found that the Audix, which to be fair, I got because they were cheaper than 421s. But I just find with the Audix that like they don't have as much bleed. It's much more manageable, which is really, really great. What I'm trying to achieve with my tom mics is to get the kind of initial hit, but also lots and lots of tone from that as well, and the sustain of that, and the Audix is a great mic for it. Again, going through the console preamp, and I'm going to do a little bit of EQ shaping as well. Position is really, really important. I usually have them about 3 fingers away from the skin, pointing towards the center, and I will take out a little bit of mids, maybe around about the 500 sort of territory, just to kind of warm that up. And I might add a little bit of low end if I need to, and then possibly a little bit high end, just again to help with that kind of like stick impact. I'm not going to use compression on that. I don't generally like compression on toms. I want them to be able to kind of bloom out if they need to. I don't want the compressor fighting that. And I may also use a little bit of the console saturation. Let's have a wee listen. So we'll have a listen to a couple of different spots. There's lots of bleed, which is natural. But let's listen to a few hits. Sounds great. And then we've got this big sort of tom section here. So lots of tone, lots of depth, and lots of punch, which is exactly what I'm looking for. Moving on to the hat and the ride cymbal now. So for this, I'm going to use the AKG 451 pencil condenser microphone. Really, really straightforward. I don't like to get too close. I usually give them a good sort of 6 inches from the cymbal. And I tend to have them on the outer edge of that. I just find that that's a bit smoother. As you move more into particularly the hi-hats into the centre, they get a bit clunky, and if that's the sound you're going for, cool. But for me, I'm always looking for something a bit smoother. Again, it's going to go through the console preamp. I'll add a little bit of EQ. I'll also put a filter on it as well, get rid of some of the low end. And again, I'm just trying to kind of even that out a little bit. Maybe give it a little sparkle with some high frequencies. And a similar sort of strategy with the ride mic as well. I don't always use a ride mic, to be fair, but I've found myself doing it more and more. Let's have a wee listen. So nice and crispy, they sound really natural. I mean, it's such a simple thing, really, get the position right, and it's good. All right, let's listen to the ride. So it sounds quite nice. It's really just emphasising what's coming through the overheads as well. Right, let's move on. Okay, next up, we're going to have a look at the overheads. So for my overheads, I really like Josephson's pencil condenser mics that they do just sound absolutely fantastic. The one thing that I'm really interested in is trying to get equidistance between the snare and the 2 microphones. So one of the tricks that I do is, rather than having them like side by side, I actually turn them on an axis, so they're going diagonally across the drum kit. I find that works quite nicely for getting equal distance between the snare to the mic to the mic, and the mic to the snare, and that really helps with phase. In terms of processing, I don't do very much at all for my overheads. I want them to sound quite natural. I will use a tiny bit of console EQ. I'll definitely put a bit of a filter, maybe only up to about 100, 150 hertz. And I may, if I feel like it needs it, add a little bit of sort of like maybe 10, 12k just to give it a bit of sparkle. But honestly, I really prefer to leave them alone. Let's have a listen. So super natural, and again, as I said, I don't do a lot of processing. I like to leave them just sounding as they are. They will get some treatment in mix, of course, but I really like capturing them just kind of nice and raw. And there's plenty of room sound in there, which is really good as well. Alright, let's move into the fun stuff, which is the ambient microphones. And for this, I've got a load of different strategies that I tend to use. For this example, we've put the drum kit in the centre of the room because I wanted that kind of blooming snare drum, and that room that I've been using in Post Electric is really great for that. So I may change this up from session to session, but let's just have a look at what we did on this particular drum sound. So the first thing I'm going to do is a mono microphone in front of the drum kit. Sometimes I have this right in front of the kick drum, facing over the kick drum and towards the snare. And in the case of this particular session, I actually had it a few feet back from the kick drum, just kind of facing it at quite low level. For that, I used a U47 clone from Jay-Z. They sound amazing. I would have used some console EQ. One of the big things that I'm trying to achieve with my ambient mics is to calm the cymbals down a little bit. So actually I'm going to use a filter on the high end, a low pass filter, to try and just take out some of the sizzle. And then one of the things that I find is that I don't like boxiness, so I might take out some of the mids to kind of warm that up, and then also add some mids in as well, just to kind of exaggerate some of the shells. And I'll also use some kind of compressor. I might use an 1176. I've usually got a few of them available. I may use a distressor if I'm not using them elsewhere. But let's have a listen and see how it sounds. And you can really hear that I've dialed out some of the high end on that, and you can hear the compression. And let's try the big tom section as well. So adding lots and lots of energy to that, which is great. Moving on to my rooms. So I am going to use two sets of rooms. I'm going to use a stereo mic called the Flamingo, which sounds incredible. And you can actually rotate how far the mics are turning. Have a look at the picture and you can see it kind of weirdly looks like Johnny Five from Short Circuit, if you're old enough to remember that. I am. And yeah, I love this on rooms. It just sounds really big and really fat. So I've got that behind the drum kit in this case. If I had the drum kit against the back wall, I would have that maybe about halfway down the room. But in this particular example, it's behind the drum kit, right in the center, with mics pointing outwards like that. Again, I'm going to use the console EQ to kind of shape it. I'm going to try and get rid of some of the high frequencies just to control the cymbals. I'm going to try and EQ some of the kind of like the mud and the boxiness, and then try and exaggerate some of the sort of impact on the shells. For this, I am going to be using the Neve 33609, like an amazing compressor, and again, just trying to kind of give it a little bit of flavour, give it a little bit of character. Let's have a listen. We're really getting good ambience there. You can hear that I've dialed out some high frequency, and you can absolutely hear the compression as well from the Neve. It's really emphasising the shells, which I love. So yeah, sounds great, and again, adding lots and lots of energy. Alright, next up, another pair of room mics, and in this example I used 414s by AKG and I set them to a figure of 8. I really was trying to capture a lot of ambience. In the past I've used Cole's room mics a lot, and again they're figure of 8, they're quite dark, which is quite good. In this case I was actually just experimenting with something else. So for this I'm using a very specific compressor, and that is the Ridge Farm boiler. And I think they describe it as an ultra compressor. It is mental. It sounds so cool, but it's not subtle in any way at all. I love what it does for rooms though. It really helps to bring out the room sound, give it that kind of length and exaggeration. Let's have a listen to it and see what you think. So they sound huge, and that figure of 8 really brings a lot of the room out, but you can really hear that Ridge Farm compressor, like it sounds mental. And again, I've darkened that so that the cymbal wash isn't so much of a problem. Let's go to that big tom section. Really splatty on the on the snare, which I love. Like, this is adding so much. I'm really into it. Alright, last up, I put a microphone in the corridor. So there's a small corridor just outside the live room in Post Electric where I recorded these drums, and I put a U67 out there. And again, it was a Jay-Z clone, which sounds fantastic. Again, I would have EQ'd it to try and kind of control some of the cymbals, and I also would have used an LA2A big valve compressor thing, which sounds amazing. This is super useful, and again, the length it adds and the sustain it adds can be fantastic. Let's have a listen. So you definitely hear the kind of distance and the length that that's adding. I think that sounds really cool. Again, it's a bit darker, which I've EQ'd, and again you can hear the compression. And let's listen to that tom section. Sounds amazing, and again it's adding loads and loads of energy. Alright, so we've went through everything individually now. Let's have a listen to how it all sounds together. Let's get some toms in. And again, let's go to that big tom section that we've looked at lots. This sounds great. So the big thing is the rooms. They're going to be adding lots and lots. So let's see what happens when we take the rooms out. And let's put them back in. And out again. So if you're not listening with headphones, this might be difficult, but this is adding a lot of energy and a lot of width. Let's mess around with the balance now, okay? So that sounds really lovely and open, but I think it's a bit too much. I kind of like to dial my rooms back a bit. I think that sounds really, really great. And again, let's take the rooms out of the equation now. And in. So again, it's subtle, but that's all right. I want it to be subtle. I'm just trying to add in a little bit of energy. Let's go to this big tom section. I mean, it sounds pretty good without the rooms, but the rooms are adding so much energy. So yeah, the rooms for me, I mean, they just sound fantastic. Let's do them on their own. What they add to the final product is amazing. And again, we've got lots of scope to sort of change things around. If we want to make the snare a bit fatter, well, let's get a nice wee snare section. Thin it out there. Bit snappier like that. And again, same with the kicks. You can really hear that thud coming through from the kick out. And again, you might be struggling if you're not listening with headphones, but the sort of the low end and the low mids of that is just fantastic. Yeah, I think that sounds great. So I'm really happy with that. Those are my dry sounds. Like, that's what I recorded. That is how it sounds before I go to mix. And my whole process of adding all of this analog goodness at this stage, when I go to mixing, it's going to get even better. And this is a huge part of my process. Adding that analog feel at this point is a big part of the identity of the drums that I make. I mix totally in the box. So having as much analog in my chain as possible is really important to me because I love analog and I would love to be mixing on a console, but it's just easier and more convenient and much better for Recall to be working in the box digitally. The key thing that I always need to be doing here is listening, okay? So if I put a microphone in front of something, I am listening to it, I'm reacting to it with my EQ, I'm reacting to it with my compressor, but if I don't like what I hear, I'm making a change at source. I'm not trying to fix problems later on. If you ever hear me saying I'll fix it in the mix, give me a slap, because it's just not the way I like to work. I hope you enjoyed that. Part 3 is coming next week when we're going to delve into the mix side of things, and I'm going to show you some of my tips, tricks and mix settings in Pro Tools to help you along. See you next time. Cheers.